Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm Tim Stein, and I'm joined with my friends Jeannie Vittoni, Dan Drake, and Wendy Conquest. Today, we're going to have a conversation about technology and the double-edged sword that it creates, and how we see that in our lives and in our caseloads.
Yeah, well,
Right.
so I'm so happy to be talking about this today. We did an interview with Dr. Pat Carnes, and he had just a wealth of information regarding how technology is impacting our culture, but more how it's impacting our kids and brain development and brain chemistry. So we thought we would have a discussion on how we're experiencing technology, cell phones, computers, and in this episode. A client actually said, "Hey, do you realize that people pick up their phones an average of 80 times a day?" And I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. I don't pick up my cell phone that much. And so the next day I was like, oh my God, I'm picking it up like constantly. And I'm like, what am I looking for? And of course, my phone beeps every time I have an email, every time I have a text. The only time that it gets really shut down is in sessions. So it's like, what the heck am I doing? How did this happen where I'm linked to my phone?
I did a training. It was an attachment-based, trauma treatment training. And the very first intervention the facilitator did, she said, okay, everyone get your cell phones out and pass it to the person next to you. And the whole thing was, what do we notice? I noticed I started getting upset. This attachment I didn't even think I realized that I had with my phone. Some strangers holding my phone. It felt really uncomfortable. I didn't want them having. I feel weird holding someone else's phone. I don't know. It was just this whole thing, like how connected we are to these. Like you said, Wendy, how we pick these things up, and it doesn't have to be just a cell phone. There's all kinds of devices we can be connected to, but just how well, even with let's say I'm taking a mini break. The restroom for my office isn't in my suite. I have to go down the hall. Do I just walk down the hall and go to the restroom, or do I pick up my phone and as I'm walking, look at what's going on my phone for 2 seconds? More often than not, I'm going to pick up my phone instead of just kind of mindfully being in the moment, walking to the restroom. And I don't know about you guys, but it just seems like this sort of knee-jerk ingrained response.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the devices, Dan, what you said about the attachment piece, I found that really striking. And what was coming to mind is our devices become an extension of us. I depend on my device. I depend on it to remember things I can't remember. And I definitely use it as a tool, but I'm realizing it's a personal extension. And if I were to be in a training, like you said, and everybody hands their phones to the left, I would be looking at this other person's phone of, oh, that's not mine. That's theirs. That's their special something. Because I really do depend on my devices to help me get through the day, get through work, manage me a little bit more, keep me organized as well.
Well, and that's the benefit. I mean, we can have access to information. I find myself watching TV and there's an actor or an actress that's like, I know them from somewhere. Where do I know them? And I find it very satisfying to look them up on my phone and like look through their movies and TV shows they've done. Oh, they were that character over there. That's where I know them from. And that kind of stuff is fun. We can communicate more effectively. We can do these podcasts and people can listen to us on their devices. There's all kinds of really wonderful information benefits that come from it. And we can get lost. I know for myself, I have to pay attention to YouTube. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, I'm glad you're there. But YouTube is problematic too, because, my YouTube feed is like a whole bunch of stuff. And do I find it? Sometimes I get in that space where I'm just watching it, not because there's something that I really want to see, but it's just going to escape, which for me, I have to be careful because that's sort of walking into my addiction patterns. And there's there's a whole piece here that we have to be careful with. I heard somewhere, I don't remember where I heard it, but somebody was saying that, future generations, when the history books are looking at this particular time, the history books are going to say, what was this generation thinking? Look at how backwards this generation was, letting their kids have access to these kind of devices at such an early age.
It's funny, Tim, because I hear sort of the opposite of that sometimes, which is when they look back on our generation, they will think how backwards we were, because so much of social interaction, which I think is a very large concern, so much of socialization has moved online. And I think I have a lot of concerns about kids replacing in-person social interactions with online social interactions. And I think in 2 generations, will they think that we were the crazy ones? Because it's such a normalized part of life going forward. I hope that they think, oh gosh, maybe they shouldn't have done that. Because that would tell me that our world headed in a different direction. I'm very curious of the impact, especially with AI coming on too. In 2 generations, what does that look like? What does our world look like?
Yeah.
Well,
I
think,
heard, go ahead, Wendy, I'll say after.
there's a statistic out there, 39% of Americans are lonely, or say that they don't feel that they have a significant relationship. So there's this whole piece of Americans feeling really lonely and isolated and disconnected. So, I mean, I realize I sometimes will walk the dog and say, okay, I'm not taking my phone. And I see other people walking their dogs and they're on their phone. And so, I think, wow, back in the day, I remember, walking a dog and, hey, how you doing? And people are waving and saying hello and interacting. Oh, what a cute dog you have. And we're just sort of, I have the feeling that we're just getting buried in these devices.
There's an interesting trend that has happened in the last like 5 to 10 years, that this is the first time in recorded history where a country's GDP, or how wealthy a country is, this is the first time it's becoming inversely relational to the country's happiness. Up until this point, the more money that we had to spend and at our disposal, the happier we tended to report that we were. And now we're starting to see that those trends get reversed, that the more money we have, the less happy we are. And I don't think it's only technology and devices, but I think that that's a significant piece, because I don't think that the socialization we get online is the same as what we get in person.
Dan?
Yeah, I'd have to look up the stats with this in the study, but I had heard about it, and I'm just going to say it, and hopefully we can follow up with some more. I'll do some more research on it. But I'd heard someone say that the classic still face experiment, that someone replicated it, more recently, last several years, to include smartphone use. How someone on their phone, and what the kind of distress caused to the infant who was being studied. So I'll just explain. You guys go through the still face experiment real quick.
I think it'd be great
go
to tell
for it.
listeners. And I think it's fascinating that they brought the phone in.
Yeah. So the original still face experiment included, so at the time, that I forget exactly when it was, but it was a long time ago. But it was mother and infant, because that was kind of the standard unit at that time. And the mother is interacting with the infant, the infant makes coos and the mom reciprocates, and they're mirroring each other. The experiment then, at some point, the mom goes still face. So she's not, she just kind of has a neutral expression. And the baby tries to connect, the infant tries to connect with mom, and there's no expression. And the interesting thing is, within seconds, the baby starts getting upset, and starts getting really upset and distressed that they can't reach mom. And then of course, after that, mom, the experiment stops, and the mom comes and re-engages with the infant, and everything's fine again. But the fascinating thing, we're so wired for connection and getting mirrored, that within seconds that we get distressed. So primal for survival. So my understanding, and again, I have to research it more, they did the experiment, but now someone's on their phone, and it seems like it was replicated in the same kind of way. So we have this sort of primal connection, attachment, distress when someone's on the phone and you're trying to reach them. And I think that's something what happens if that becomes what I get used to? That, oh, I make a bid to connect with my parent or my significant other or a friend, and they're on their phone. If that's normal for me, and maybe I stop losing the distress because now I actually have to cope with that world. What does that do to us, and how do we kind of, I don't know, are we ready for that if we're so wired for connection and mirroring? How does that affect us, and what are we going to be seeing long term?
I have such
this
a
this reminds me of what Wendy was saying, Dan. And I don't have studies to give you citations, but I've read this, like Wendy was saying, that many people feel lonely, especially in our young adult kid world. The increase of socialization online is correlating with a decrease of connection and increase of loneliness. And then there's the question, of course, is this leading to more mental health, depression, and possible suicide ideation? But we've got this inverse relationship between social media being everything's wonderful, here's this facade, and I'm used to maybe not engaging, but actually when I'm in my room, I'm by myself. And that's a real concern for our society. Wendy?
Yeah, what was coming up for me was texting. So if someone texts me, do I have to answer? It's the first thing. If someone texts me and I answer, and then they text me back, or I send a text and I don't get a text back, it's this whole dynamic of putting a communication out there, putting out I want to connect with you, and then not getting connection, or getting a stilted connection. And I mean, I've been really thinking, how does this affect people long term? Do they just sort of give up on connection and just say, yeah, okay, well, and I hear this like from young kids, yeah, if they text me back, fine, I understand. They're busy, I understand. But really, are we just making excuses for our feeling of being rejected? Like, is it a rejection? Because some people end a text stream of, okay, well, have a great day. Okay, you too. But a lot of times it just sort of goes into the ethers. And the conversation sort of doesn't end. And we know, so I heard this recently that the main things that we think about are around unresolved issues. We don't really think about things that are completed, right? Like a completed piece. It's the things that are not. So unconsciously, are we consistently going, oh, what about that text? Oh, what about that voicemail? Oh, what about that email I got? Oh, what about, it can be maddening.
Yeah. And like you were saying, sometimes it just goes away. And when we do in-person stuff, and even with a phone, if somebody's wrapping up, they're hanging up on you. They may say goodbye, they may be pissed off but the phone call's ending.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of stuff that is like, send it out there, don't hear anything. What do you think? Do you give them the benefit of the doubt because you're in that space of like, well, maybe something happened, it got lost in the ether somewhere, and maybe I'll follow up again later? Or do you assume and sit with, they didn't get back to me, and let yourself get wrapped up on assuming they got the message, but they're choosing not to respond?
Yeah.
I think there's so much research to be done in the impact of technology on socialization and interpersonal satisfaction in the mental health field.
Yeah.
I don't know that research as well, but I can imagine there's a plethora of opportunity to study this. And then the question, of course, is, and then what does that mean for our future? What can we do to be corrective so that folks have engaging, meaningful relationships and balance of technology? Because technology is not going away.
I think that's going to be one of the things that we have to figure out. Technology is here in all kinds of ways, and in some ways, it's going to make our life easier, less, it's going to take less time, less energy. There's lots of things that we have to spend time and energy on that technology is going to make a lot simpler. And so the question is, as we have more time on our hands, as life gets easier, what do we choose to do with it? Do we step into the technology bubble and isolate and feel lonely? Or when do we recognize that we have more time on our hands because technology has come along and it gives us an opportunity to take that time to connect with other people, to step outside of our bubble and to interact with others? Um, I think that there's an art of being able to connect with and talk with people that we don't see eye to eye with that has taken a huge hit with everything that's going on right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with we don't interact with people out there anymore.
You
We,
know, I'm
My
thinking of a client who, and I don't know much about this organization, but they call it a technology addiction. You know, that not stepping away from the technology or gaming, or are they going to return my call, or what else can I look at online? So I love the fact that there are people really looking at this and being aware that the amount of technology and how they're trying to get their human emotions met via technology, that can be a real problem. So there are some organizations out there. And so if you're thinking, you're a listener and you're thinking maybe you need to take a look at your technology use or someone else's, um, go online. Yeah. But there could be some organizations to assist.
I
so
also want to say too, just thinking of, you used the word connection, Tim, and I think we have to consider, what does connection look like in this age? Connection doesn't look like what it looked like when we were all growing up, right? It looks a little different now. So there is a different definition. For example, prior to the pandemic, I never would have thought that I could do a lot of the things I do therapeutically remotely. I have most of my work is remote at this point. I can do EMDR remotely. I can do, all kinds of stuff remotely. Is it the same? I don't think so. I think there's nothing that replicates, being in the room with another human being. But I think there's so many gifts that technology brings. So how do we like, I think kind of what you were saying, live in balance, that we use the good of it while also
yeah.
not using this extra time to then get more addicted with something else, technology, and staying disconnected and isolated. I think there's something about this that I think there's beauty, but also
So
incredible problems too.
building on that, as we kind of start wrapping up here, where do you get your hope? The hope for what could be. We were talking, technology has its benefits, but we're talking a lot about the impact. And like you just said, Dan, technology's allowed us to do stuff that we couldn't have done before, that we couldn't have thought about that. Like I know the same thing. Like Jeannie and I right now, we have an issue at our office, which is all kinds of fun. But the thing that's come about is that we've been able to move our clients online while our office really isn't usable, which in the past wouldn't have been workable. And so there's an ability to continue to offer services and support and guidance, even though there's this situation that's difficult that is only there because of technology. But I'm curious, where do you guys, when we're talking about this and sort of like thinking about it, what's your hope?
Well, my thought is that everyone used to smoke cigarettes back in the day, and restaurants, at home, and then we started finding out about the negative impact of secondhand smoke and smoking directly. And so I don't know if there's anyone out there that doesn't realize that the risks involved, and they can choose whether they want to smoke tobacco or not. But at least we know, we have the science behind it, and we know. So my hope is that as time goes on, we're going to learn, hey, be on your computer doing social media a half hour a day, and that's it. Your computer automatically shuts down at half an hour, something like that. So I'll be really curious, but my hope is that we will get more and more information about how it's affecting us, and then be able to say, hey, maybe this wasn't, we kind of jumped into it was exciting, it was new, and maybe it's not the best thing for our mental and physical health. I think about too real quick, so the washing machine was invented so that people would take that time that they weren't washing clothes and use it for recreation and for socialization. But what they found is that people just worked more. They diverted that time into working and doing other things. So the intent was there, but what we did with it was different.
You know, I'm when you shared earlier about the young adult who is not looking at her screen and putting it down, and I do know our next generations are much more minimalistic than previous generations. They're much more thoughtful about what they purchase, how often they purchase. And so perhaps maybe there's my hope, perhaps there is this growing movement of becoming more aware of the impact of technology, using phones, iPads, computers, gaming, social media. Maybe that newer generation who is much more minimalistic will start to move into applying that into technology.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll have a rebound of social interactions. That's my hope.
Yeah, I've been mulling things over, and I feel like it's a bit idealistic because it can't be an either or. I mean, it's here. So I think if we can find ways, maybe new ways to connect using what we have, and also putting things down for a minute and really connecting with another human being in a room with that person, wouldn't that be nice? And I think that's my hope. And that doesn't mean we have to go with a complete, wash of all technology. I think it's an amazing what we have. It's incredible. We've just, even in our field, the resources and the accessibility of the stuff, the information that people can find all over the world. It's not just local stuff. There's ability to transfer information and connect with people all over the world now that we've never had. And I supervise people in all over the world right now, and it's amazing. So that's good.
Yeah.
And there's no substitute. My hope is also that we don't lose what it's like to be in the room with another human being, not distracted.
Yeah. I think my hope comes twofold. One is that we are recognizing that the internet and the technology out there has been a little bit of the Wild West. And while that's been fun, it's also been problematic. And so we're seeing things like Texas recently passed a law that porn sites have to have a verifiable way of you're actually 18 to give access to that content.
Not just a checkbox?
Not just a checkbox. That apparently people aren't always honest when it's only a checkbox.
Oh.
And also, there's conversations in Congress about making internet platforms more responsible for the content that people post on them. So the wild, wild west seems to be getting a little bit contained, and we're recognizing, hey, there's a balance here that we got to figure out. My other hope that I have is what you said, Wendy, is that you're seeing more and more people that are putting their phones down, more young people that are putting it away and being minimalistic with that. And I loved Dan. I'm going to out you here just a little bit. I hope that's okay. But I appreciated
Depends on what you're going to say.
I appreciated you talking about having a phone-free table. And that we're just having this conversation. I think that this sort of like conversation it feels like a gestalt that's sort of hitting that point, similar to the 70s when all these sex addiction 12-step programs just showed up independent of each other because everything had hit a head and needed to be addressed. And I make up that we're having this conversation, other people are having this conversation, stuff is starting to hit that point, and I don't know what it's going to look like. And I agree. I think that there's lots of good stuff. It's not an all or nothing, but I have hope because I think we're starting to recognize that we need to figure out how to interact with and live with technology in a healthy way. So I have hope that we can figure that out. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us today on Conversations. Really appreciate it. If you liked what we did, frankly, if you didn't like what we did, please rate us anyway. But rate us on whatever platform you're finding us. It helps people to find us. And also, if you have questions you would like us to ask, if you have questions you would like us to answer and you would like to ask us, send them to us at conversations.sar@gmail.com. Thank you so much, everyone.
We're also open to answers if people have answers.
We're always looking for answers.